as the senior judge of this particular session, lay out the ground rules for what we're going to accomplish during our shared time together here today. First and foremost, I want to reiterate Maya's point that this is a blind judging competition. So as the judges introduce ourselves here today, we don't even identify our alma maters in the university we're affiliated with. We'll give an introduction to our professional expertise, how long we've been judging these competitions. And at that point, after the introductions, then we'll turn it over to you and you'll have a chance to present. So briefly, I'm Jason West. I work in the market research vertical, qualitative research specifically. Have my own boutique consulting firm after working in the corporate sphere for a couple decades. I have the hair to show it. I've been working a few years here. And I've been judging IBESCC for, I think I'm entering my 6th or 7th year here. So learn as much from you as the students as I do from the content. So it's always a pleasure and an honor to be part of these panels, these non-judgy panels. And I also wear a student hat too. I'm a doctoral student. So you're in good company of someone who I know the research, I know you're peeling the onion and you've done a lot of work to prepare for this moment. So glad to be here and turn it over to Robert now for an introduction as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Robert Bittner. I'm really glad to be here to hear what you guys have to say to us today. I concur. We always learn something new and both in what you're talking about and how you talk about it. I am retired from 35 years of designing and building communication satellites, which is what a major in economics and statistics does, I guess. So did that. I've got a bachelor's in industrial engineering, master's in business, certificates in project management and risk aversion management. So with that, I think we can toss it back to you.
All right. Well, next participants, Top Hat Consulting, in the next part of our competition, you're taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to us as the judges. So make sure that everyone knows our roles in our dialogue moving forward here. You'll have 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of a problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 of those accounts. During this time, you get to present uninterrupted. When you're finished, we'll ask you questions for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then during the Q&A, both you and judges stay in character. So we still assume that identity. And then at the end, after the Q&A, we take our characters off, if you will, and we'll be able to provide you some feedback, answer any questions you may have as you edit, enhance, change your presentation. And outside of that role playing, we'll have some additional dialogue and round out our time together. So the floor is yours now.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. We are Top Hat Consulting, and we are here to advise you, SpaceX, on how you can best navigate the sustainability conundrum facing your company and the space industry today. Excuse me. Now, we are living through a time of unprecedented human development, with the space industry undergoing some incredible changes over the past decades. Now, there's been an industry-wide shift towards the private sector, and this has caused the industry to grow and thrive in many ways that were unexpected just many decades ago. And of course, SpaceX is leading this change. But today we will be discussing how SpaceX will not only be a leader in SpaceX's development, but also in space's sustainability. In other words, we are here to advise you, SpaceX, on how you can be the sustainability leader when it comes to space development. But before we get down to business, let's introduce our team and go over our agenda. There we go. My name is Audrey Burley, and I'm a senior consultant with Top Hat Consulting. We also have Jalen Walton, John Owen, and Emelina Simonis.
Top Hat Consulting has joined you here today to help ensure that SpaceX makes the most of these opportunities for years to come. Our consultation will walk you through an overview of the new space industry and highlight the ways that SpaceX has become a leader within this new industry. We will then address the space sustainability issues that threaten to disrupt future space endeavors and provide our recommendation for how SpaceX can help overcome these issues. while building off your position as an industry leader and innovator. Now, Jalen will give you an overview of the new space industry.
As I was saying, we are witnessing a new chapter of spaceflight led by private actors instead of governments. After decades of centralized control of space activities, NASA and US policymakers have begun to give control over to commercial companies. In 1984, former President Ronald Reagan signed the Commercial Space Launch Act, saying that one of the objectives of his administration was the encouragement of the private sector in commercial space activities, and this has continued ever since. The companies that emerged from this transition to a commercial space industry are generally known as new space, and SpaceX is a standout leader of new space, particularly in the category of space access. As seen in this model, SpaceX has consistently launched more satellites than any other company for the past 5 years. In the past, government-organized space programs focused on space for Earth activities, such as telecommunications or national security satellites, whereas the private sector is more focused on personal interests. A widely shared goal amongst the commercial space leaders is the achievement of a large-scale and self-sufficient economy, both in and for space. There are tons of new developing space-related industries, such as 3D manufacturing, space tourism, lunar mining, space farming, and Mars colonization. SpaceX's very own Elon Musk has plans of building a city of 1 million people within the next century. The implications of such a space economy act as a huge opportunity. Private revenue recently totaled 78% of the space economy. As such, new space doesn't just represent a new generation of companies, but also a new approach to space activities. The shift towards commercialization offers countless opportunities for mankind's collective advancement. My colleague Emma will now talk about how SpaceX is leading this advancement.
In 2020, for the first time in history, humans accessed space in a vehicle built and owned by a private corporation, and that corporation was none other than SpaceX. SpaceX has proven to be a trailblazer for the commercial space industry. Within 20 years, SpaceX has secured 60% of the global commercial launch market and is building ever bigger projects. Your company is now responsible for 80% of payload launches. In 2023, SpaceX conducted a total of 98 launches with a goal to reach 144 rocket launches in 2024.
So when thinking about all of the areas that SpaceX is involved in, SpaceX is involved in has their hand in almost every area of the space industry, whether it comes to building lunar modules for NASA or research and planning Mars colonization. However, their standout program is Starlink. Now, Starlink is the world's first and largest satellite constellations. And currently there are 5,504 Starlink satellites operating in low Earth orbit to deliver high-speed broadband internet to users all over the world. And this internet can be accessed whether you're in the Pacific Ocean or in the Appalachian Mountains. So it really is changing lives. And now there are currently 2.4 million customers of Starlink. However, this is going to be quickly changing because SpaceX has plans to gain approval to operate 43,000 satellites into orbit. However, as we will note in the next portion of our presentation, this does not come without consequences, specifically when it comes to sustainability.
Thank you, Audrey. The space industry is rapidly developing. SpaceX is making lots of progress and projects and innovations that will be a huge asset for humanity in the future. However, the future of space, as envisioned by innovators, such as SpaceX, will only be possible if we balance the current opportunities and needs of space activity with the necessity of preserving the space environment for future generations. Finding this balance is the crux of space sustainability. Space sustainability can be broadly understood as measures that are designed to ensure that space activities don't have negative effects on the space environment or Earth. The overall goal of space sustainability is to create and implement practices that meet the needs of the present generations while simultaneously preserving the outer space environment for future generations. There are three sustainable implications that need to be quickly addressed to prevent significant consequences down the line. One, the lack of federal and international regulation regarding space activity. Two, the growing prevalence of space debris. And three, the impact of emissions from launches. For example, the lack of regulation. Current international space legislation neither prohibits or endorses the private use of space resources in space. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty continues to be the main framework for international cooperation, which clearly states that no national government or entity has authority over property rights in space. While this treaty encourages cooperation on the responsible development and uses of the space environment, it does not impose any strict requirements or methods of enforcement. The ambiguity regarding space rights hasn't posed too much concern for several decades. However, the rise of commercial space industry activity has added a sense of urgency for determining regulations. Without some sort of centralized or nationally recognized action, the lack of space regulation poses a real problem. It's extremely difficult to set and enforce space regulations for a number of reasons. There are no property rights in space. There is no space taxing authority. There is very little ability to monitor and discipline actions regarding space activity. When it comes to weighing the risks and opportunities for a specific action, it is largely up to private companies like SpaceX to decide what's right from wrong. This kind of decision-making power can be a liability, but SpaceX can choose to see this lack of guidance as an opportunity to set the standard for space policy. SpaceX can see this as a chance to set the standard for space regulation to get the competitive advantage over companies and set standards to be seen as a leader in the space industry. Advocating for more regulation will improve SpaceX's reputation amongst the public and the company's space stakeholders who are directly impacted by SpaceX's practices. One concrete example of the hardships imposed by the lack of regulation and enforcement is the growing issue of space debris in Earth's orbit, which leads us to the second key issue of space sustainability.
The development of space is generating concerns about overuse and crowding in the most useful regions of low Earth orbit. Humanity has launched more than 12,000 satellites since the dawn of the space age. 7,630 of them remain in orbit today, but only 4,700 are still operational. This means that there are nearly 3,000 defunct satellites currently in orbit around Earth, along with other pieces of dangerous debris from rockets, other satellites, and general spacecraft. Orbital debris poses a huge risk to both future activity, space activity, and life here on Earth. As we speak, there are at least 23,000 pieces of space debris larger than 4 inches in orbit, 500,000 pieces larger than 0.4 inches, and potentially 100 million pieces smaller than that. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but don't be fooled. A piece of metal the size of a cherry carries the explosive power of a grenade when in orbit. Orbital velocity at 250 miles up, which is the altitude at which the ISS flies, is about 17,100 miles per hour. Imagine the kind of damage space debris could do if it hit the ISS at that speed, or any of your Starlink projects that provide essential services to conduct life here on Earth, just like the other satellites, such as telecommunications, GPS, monitoring rights around Earth. Most of this debris has been created in the last 10 years, and with the current trajectory of the space industry, it doesn't look like it plans to slow down. If left unchecked, all of this debris in Earth's orbit risks causing the Kessler syndrome. The Kessler syndrome refers to a phenomenon in which the junk in orbit around Earth reaches a point where it creates more and more space debris uncontrollably. The Kessler syndrome would make it impossible for projects like Starlink to operate safely. This would threaten both Earth infrastructure as far as internet, cell service, GPS, climate control, any of the human rights activities that we monitor with our spacecraft, as well as space innovation, as well as eventually the atmosphere would become too congested and dangerous to launch any more missions of any kind.
Thank you, Jalen. As previously mentioned, there have been thousands of spacecraft launches since the dawn of the space age. And these launches don't just risk adding to the problem of space debris, they also risk causing serious damage to the Earth's atmosphere. The kind of soot released by rocket ships is 500 times more effective at heating the atmosphere than soot released from airplanes. In fact, a study conducted at Aerospace Research Center found that in the 1990s, a hole in the ozone was formed above the Kennedy Space Center from launching just 25 rockets a year. In 2023 alone, SpaceX launched 98 rockets. The soot released from these rockets falls from the upper atmosphere into the middle atmosphere, impacting the ozone layer. And what goes up must come down. When inactive satellites inevitably fall back to Earth and burn up, they release hazardous metals. For example, scientists found two chemicals that are produced by rocket emissions, niobium and hafnium, embedded in about 10% of all particles within the stratosphere. While scientists are still unsure what the effects of these metals are, if we think about the Earth as a human body, anywhere we find something where it shouldn't be, it usually isn't good. That being said, we understand that SpaceX cannot simply stop making rockets, and we're not against space development. In fact, space development has the potential to do so much good, and doing it sustainably ensures the next generations will have access to that good.
Despite its rapid growth and impressive achievements so far, the space industry will come to a screeching halt if sustainable practices are not implemented now. Look at any successful industry on Earth. No one goes far without clear guidelines, procedures, and expectations to follow. SpaceX must implement an internal organizational structure that promotes sustainability between SpaceX employees, leadership, and stakeholders. This includes defining this company's sustainability objectives and goals, investing in an internal organizational structure, and implementing public reporting practices. This can look like appointing a chief sustainability officer and a corporate social responsibility team focused on sustainability. SpaceX's CEO is a trailblazer who prides himself on being a first mover, a needle mover, an innovator, and this solution will allow him to continue his innovation.
So now we want to dive into a model of our solution. As Emma was just talking about, we have a framework that we'd like to present to you today. But also when we're thinking about, this transition to being a sustainability trailblazer, it's kind of a scary thought. But so we want to give this example of Interface. Now, Interface is a carpet company that underwent an extreme transformation under the guidance of its founder and former CEO, Ray Anderson. Now, what happened is Ray Anderson, one day, one of his employees came to him and said, "Hey, what's our sustainability policy?" And he realized, we don't actually have one. And that led him to start thinking. And he decided that he wanted Interface to be the leader of the next industrial revolution focused on sustainability. And this is an extremely big deal because the carpet industry is extremely polluting because carpets are made from petroleum oil. So this seemed like something that was unachievable, but Ray Anderson knew he wanted to achieve this. And in fact, he did. The company released the world's first carbon negative carpet tile without using carbon offsets. And additionally, they were able to get renewable energy up to 84%, with 6 out of 7 of their manufacturing sites being run solely on renewables. Their net greenhouse gas emissions went down 82% or 92% per pound of carpet, and their waste was cut by 91% from manufacturing and disposal operations. And so when we're talking about reducing waste and increasing efficiency, those are all great things because they increase sustainability. But what Ray Anderson found is that these things also save money, because when you embed sustainability into your company by recognizing shareholder value, the outcome is that it creates financial savings that compound exponentially. In fact, by the year 2000, all of the initiatives that Ray Anderson had put into Interface related to sustainability generated a total savings of $185.4 million. But how did he go about this? Well, actually, he did something very similar to the framework that we're recommending for you today. Now, it's important to note that Interface is not in the exact same industry as SpaceX. So how you implement these, this framework might be different, but it's great to get inspiration from how it went about at Interface. First, he defined sustainability objectives and goals. Ray Anderson set the public task to climb Mount Sustainability, that is achieving net carbon zero. And by taking nothing from nature that cannot rapidly be renewed, renewable, and creating nothing that harms the Earth's biosphere. Second was investing in an internal organizational structure. He created what he called the Dream Team, with some of the best minds in sustainability to implement policies that incorporated sustainability into the bedrock of the company. And third, he implemented public reporting practices. Interface released regular sustainability reports and updates, as well as participated in certificate programs, including Cradle to Cradle, to help verify to the public that their products are what they say. And so with that in mind, we really wanted to hone in on the different goals that we have in our framework for you today. And we are not engineers. We cannot tell you how to engineer your satellites to be more sustainable. However, we do understand that our framework can be used to help you go about and do this in an organizational way. So now I'd like to walk you through some of our legal ideas for this framework. There are a few space policies and regulations currently enacted, but soon there will be. As an industry leader for new space, SpaceX could be an instrumental factor in setting the precedent for how commercial space activities will be conducted in the future. SpaceX has a chance to get ahead of the curve legally and maintain its status as an industry leader. On your website, you mentioned that sustainability is important to your company, but you don't specifically define what sustainability looks like. We think it would be beneficial to define specific sustainable objectives to help your organization fully realize responsible development. Just as Audrey mentioned with Ray Anderson, he clearly defined sustainability to his company and stakeholders, which allowed them to develop an internal organizational structure and implement public reporting practices based off of their achievements. A great example of sustainability reporting could be the Space Sustainability System report, which implements a tier system to rate people. There is also the 21 guidelines that have been put out by the Committee for Peaceful Uses in Space, which SpaceX could have an extremely huge impact with: policy and regulatory framework, the safety of space operations, international cooperation and awareness, and scientific research and development are the 4 key areas that these guidelines have been split into. And now my colleague Emma will take over with some of the financial frameworks.
Let's talk about the cost of our solution. It's a very important part, so let's get into it. Implementing an internal sustainability structure can mean many different things. For example, hiring a chief sustainability officer to find the balance between eco-friendly practices while maintaining efficiency and productivity without sacrificing company performance. The national average salary of a CSO is about $93,000 annually. In addition to hiring a CSO, we recommend that SpaceX consider appointing a corporate social responsibility team, and the average salary of a corporate responsibility person is about $40,000 per year per person. The team will research, generate ideas, formulate policies to implement, manage, and oversee a variety of activities and projects aimed at improving the environment as well as the reputation of SpaceX.
Now with that, we're going to move on to our ethical section. John?
As outlined by my colleagues, CSR can look like a plethora of things, from creating a CSR team to defining sustainability. CSR will allow SpaceX to save money by being sustainable. Along with that, you will also be aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Regarding these goals, SDGs 9 and 12 should be of particular importance to SpaceX. In a nutshell, these goals mean doing more and better with less. At the end of the day, it comes down to responsibility. There's no question the impact the space industry has on the Earth and the space environment. And as new space companies like SpaceX continue to develop and advance, these impacts will only become more prevalent. We can't change how space activities have been conducted in the past, but we can decide how they'll be done in the future. Therefore, SpaceX should take advantage of this opportunity and lead the way on the path to sustainability.
In conclusion, our framework is to define sustainability objectives and goals, invest in internal organizational structure, and implement public reporting practices. As we said before, how you implement these goals is up to you, but we really wanted to provide the framework for you to advance sustainability at SpaceX and to achieve your goal of becoming the innovator and industry leader. Thank you for joining us today. We will now take any questions.
Thank you, Top Hat Consulting. As one of the longest serving SpaceX Board of Directors, along with Robert, I know we have a few questions for you. I'm going to lead one off right now, a little more granular here on the ethical component. As SpaceX leads the expansion into space with projects like Starlink, how does your team propose the company address the ethical dilemmas related to the potential monopolization of space resources? So really more thinking about that equitable access to space-derived benefits for all global stakeholders.
Do you mind restating your question, please?
Sure. Frame it more for just the former of it. You spend a lot of time talking about projects like Starlink.
Mm-hmm.
So when you propose that the company address some of the ethical dilemmas related to, there's a lot of monopolization of resources, will sustainability solve for that? Or is there something else that you would recommend our board consider outside of, there was a lot of focus on sustainability.
Sure.
So when you think of the monopolization, will SpaceX be considered as monopolizing too much? Or do you think we're playing in?
Certainly, I think there is some monopolization going on, and as part of our framework, we've outlined that CSR team, and corporate social responsibility isn't just about sustainability. It's also about public relations and sending out annual reports and dealing with and optimizing value for stakeholders. And in terms of the ethics, that would be something that the CSR team would need to deal with, and collaborate with other companies in terms of information about space, that sort of thing.
My apologies. My colleague Jalen started talking, but I forgot my mic was off because I forgot hers wasn't working. So if she can add something, she would like to.
Just in referencing, the monopolization that is the potential that SpaceX could have on the space environment, especially considering the commercial industry and how everything these days, with the Commercial Launch Act developed, the 2015 Act that really kind of gets out this first come, first serve mentality. There's absolutely the potential for a company like SpaceX to really get there first and kind of take up all these resources here. A lot of that is what's going to be mitigated in the future as we implement things, the 21 guidelines that have been established by the Committee for Peaceful Uses of Outer Space Resources and Environments. It's all voluntary right now. It's all the initial stuff. The space industry is such a baby, really, when it's when we're implementing these policies and everything like that. I will point out that SpaceX is primarily in the category of space access in the new space industry. There are a couple of different categories that were there. We mentioned, there are mining projects going on. There are companies in new space that are primarily just for satellite and data. So there's a couple of different ways that will help as we develop the procedures, as federal and international regulations are imposed, that we hope will help mitigate these issues of potential monopolization. But the other side of it is definitely the ethics of what is SpaceX going to do now to step forward as an industry leader and to prevent the unethical situations that could arise from a monopolization. And so a lot of that really comes into what you as the SpaceX board are wanting to see for the future, and what sustainable practices and guidelines are you willing to implement now in order so that your vision for SpaceX and all of the wonderful things that it'll achieve can actually happen in the future.
And I would like to add that SpaceX, you don't have a monopoly on satellites right now, you have a monopoly on launches. Majority of other satellite industries use SpaceX boosters to get their satellites into orbit, but that's quickly changing. In fact, this last year was a record in other satellite companies getting their satellites up into orbit without using SpaceX's Falcon 9 rockets, for example. So really, when we're thinking about how SpaceX is going to differentiate themselves in the future, sustainability is a very important component of that, because SpaceX is not going to have a monopoly on the satellite industry for long, when competitors like Amazon are really pushing to get their products out there. They're just figuring out the launch system, which is going to be happening very soon.
And as board of directors, we have an important role here in the recommendation engine, but you may be aware we also have a whimsical, if not sometimes capricious, CEO leading SpaceX. In your research, which appeared very comprehensive, what would you identify as one or two of the most important points that we might share with our CEO to shift the needle and to take your proposal into consideration for him?
One of the biggest ones, I would say, I think I can touch on one point, maybe my colleagues would like to take another, is you already are doing a lot when it comes to sustainability. For example, your reusable boosters, how it operates. You send your rocket and the booster up to space, release the satellites, and the booster comes down and relands on the launch pad. You are the first company to ever successfully do that. And it is saving millions of dollars per launch, not to mention 1.4 million pounds of material per launch, which is a huge component when it comes to sustainability, not losing these resources to space where they're just going to sit there or when they burn up upon re-entry. So sustainability is already something that SpaceX is doing, but it's just about thinking about its impacts in the longer term as well. Because the issue is, when it comes to space and space development, there's so many things that we don't know. So sustainability issues are just going to keep popping up. So it's really having a system in place and a mission to identify them and to address them. So I would say that sustainability is already a practice that SpaceX is implementing. It's really making sure that there's a structure there to ensure that it continues as more issues arise.
Thank you. Robert.
Yeah,
you've had rounds and rounds with our CEO. I know you likely have some very important questions.
So let me jump in. One is, and you guys have already acknowledged this, we exist because governments were far more ineffective in how much money they spent to do what we do, and less efficient. So, governments like the United States and such have come to us and say, you're pulling this off for a lot less money than we ever could. And my gut feel, and I know this wasn't part of your presentation, but my gut feel is that if you were to do a projection of the types of launch vehicles and support systems that were there 5-10 years ago, and projected that to the amount of product going into space these days, you'd find that we are quite a sustainable company. My question to you guys, given that, these entities have come to us, and it's not really our fault that United Nations, organization that's supposed to monitor space and the international consortium that's supposed to monitor it, really hasn't updated their laws to how private entities would function now in this space. But my question to you is more specific. It is an international capability to launch into space and to build satellites. So I love the idea of more sustainability, but at the same time, my mind goes to where we try and tell other countries, hey, you need to stop burning fossil fuels. And they say, well, wait a minute, you're still burning them much more than we are. How are we going to do this in a way that's not going to ruin our competitive advantage by us taking this path and the rest of the world saying, aha, now we're going to jump in and grab the business?
We can-
Absolutely. Emma, you go ahead.
Okay, we completely understand that it's not your fault that there's a bunch of orbital debris up there. And we also understand that SpaceX can't tell other companies what to do, but you can be an example. You are a leader in the industry. It's completely undeniable. And our CEO, as you know, has a lot of influence on the people around him. So I believe without a doubt that if he were to present a solution that other people can get on board with, I do believe that it would cause a positive ripple effect, not only in the environment, not only in the space industry, but like in the environmental industry. He prides himself on being an innovator, first mover, and this would give him the opportunity to say, this would allow him to write the rules and have people follow him as opposed to following the rules of others that could constrain his creativity and his thirst for innovation.
But what's going to make the rest of the world fall in line with that?
Absolutely. And that's a great point that my colleague Emma rose. And the other thing that I would like to say to that is there's always pushback when you try to put limits on someone and try to constrain an industry, especially when money is on the line, especially when reputation is on the line. The thing that is indisputable about the emerging space industry, whether you are working for government actors or commercialized actors, is that if you don't take care of this environment and these resources ahead of time, if you don't implement sustainable plans now, if you don't think ahead, you're going to lose all of the potential resources in the future. And eventually, at some point, that is going to be what pushes the entire world to move towards that direction. Because take the satellite issue, for example, if we don't take care of what's happening with the satellites clogging up Earth's orbit, there's not going to be any kind of launches that are going anymore. And it's going to disrupt our daily life here on Earth. If the Kessler syndrome's enacted, that's going to be our GPS gone, our telecommunications, our cell services. So at some point, you're just going to have to lay out the practical application, and every spacefaring nation will have to come to terms with this, which is if you don't take care of the space environment now, as you're managing your current needs, then the future generations aren't going to have a space environment to interact with at all. And that's going to be the basis. That's going to be the driving point that everyone's going to have to get on board with, or else there will be no space environment. So it's really not a matter of if sustainable practice should be implemented, if we can convince people. It's going to be when they are convinced. And is SpaceX going to be leading that charge and setting the standard for the industry and further bolstering their reputation as a SpaceX leader, as a new space leader? Or are they going to fall behind and let somebody else set the rules for them?
As the consultants to the board here, you've spoken of a lot of the uptick, a lot of the upswing of if we consider your proposal. What would you say is the biggest downside if we don't move forward? What's the damage potentially to SpaceX?
I would say that you may have already seen some of the damage play out. Now, maybe it wasn't intentional. Great example of this, the first Starship launch that happened in Texas in Boca Chica. There was on the launch pad, as you know, once the Starship started to take off, the launch pad couldn't handle it, and chunks of concrete started flying everywhere. They hit people's cars, knocked into people's homes, fell into the ocean, and even disturbed a very specific endangered habitat with tortoises that are protected. And because of this, the FAA really cracked down on you for your second Starship launch and even your third Starship launch. You had to go through a lot more hoops to get approval, and eventually you did, but the launch was delayed. This is a great example of how this is something that was unprecedented before. We've never had a situation, there's no policy regarding checks and balances. A rocket ship has to go through and the launch pad as well. well before a liftoff happens. But if you don't take accountability and are very careful and very intentional in how you are going about this space development, if you do it wrong, you're going to have a crackdown happen. And that is very dangerous for you as a company. This is kind of what my colleague Jalen was talking about earlier. And this is going to have a lot more costs that are incurred because of this. Costs, for example, with this example of rebuilding the launch pad, of having to hire a legal team to go through the hoops to get FAA approval. And so these costs really add up. And that's one thing when it comes to implementing sustainability. It is investing money now to save a lot more money later. So I would say that is the biggest cost that will be had if you don't implement a solution and really start thinking about sustainability now.
Robert, any final questions from you before we take the proposal into consideration?
No more questions.
Well, this concludes our review of your proposal. Thank you, Top Hat Consulting, for a comprehensive presentation to the Board of Directors. We'll be presenting it to our CEO, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
with that, we are out of character.
Sorry.
Hats off, Top Hat Consulting.
We really appreciate y'all being flexible with our technical difficulties, by the way. That was super helpful. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. We didn't grab Jalen's computer when she moved into my room, so her computer just died. So she's here, but I'm trying to show
Okay.
the background off so you can see
I can
her.
see a
So
little-
she's
yeah.
here.
You're fortunate that you're in the same room. I've had other panels today
exactly.
where they're in different countries, in fact. So some of the students, as you know, that are competing are international students, so they maybe have different footprints and have worked together. So you're lucky she's in the same room, but if there's nothing we've learned from the pandemic, it's that technology does not always behave, you know?
Like with rocket launching. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, for as we wrap up our discussion, this is our chance now to get out of character. We'll give you feedback briefly on your presentation and answer any questions you might have leading into the other either the 10-minute or the 90-second presentations that you may have for the competition. I'll start out with some feedback. I was very impressed with the thoroughness of the data points. I think data points are very compelling in building a case, building the argument for which you're presenting in real life business scenarios. So I can tell that you spent a lot of time on this presentation, a lot of time making sure your facts were correct, your facts were compelling. So I really appreciated that. And also the cohesiveness of the presentation. I think branding is important on any of these, especially with online presentations. You weren't in person, you're online. So it felt very cohesive that you all worked together to create a unified front and were able to have a knowledge set of each other's topic areas. So it wasn't just that, well, I only know about the ethics, and you were able to piggyback off, add other commentary. So that felt very much aligned to what a team presentation should be like. So very well done on that front.
Yeah, no, you guys handled a very interesting topic very well. I worked in that industry for 35 years. I'm very, very familiar with a lot of the rules and regulations and how in the past countries would even violate them. For instance, there were laws about how far you could space satellites apart. And at one point, China said, well, we think that's too wide, and shoved a satellite up in between where they shouldn't have. So these are kind of things that get contested all the time. With just a couple of bullet points, you had a good example of the type of damage, bringing up the Kessler, analysis or fact. Those are really, really good issues to keep, bringing up. You brought it back up in response to a question. That is we do not have the ability to gather space debris. So that is a dead end for the space industry. And you might want to, if you were doing this again, I might emphasize that a little bit. Say, great, you're making money now, but that brick wall your vehicle's flying into that brick wall. And that's going to happen, faster than you think. So I'm glad you brought that up. With respect to the development of the launch vehicle, yeah, well, our government went through a lot of failed attempts back in the 60s. So I wouldn't necessarily say that this development they're doing now is all that different. It is being done, there are what's viewed as irresponsible elements. You know, they screw up a launch. Musk says, hey, we made it a little farther this time. It's like, well, wait a minute, what about everyone on the ground? So I'm really glad you brought that up. That is front page and real. And so good, you know, kudos. What the package you put together really, really felt like a consultant package. I've been to others that sound more like a sales pitch. So you guys put together a good consultant package, and I appreciated that. That's it for me.
As we could shift into any recommendations that we might have for this team, Robert. I was thinking the only one is that I think with SpaceX, because it is such it's known that Musk leads the ship here. Somehow in the narrative, if it's not on a slide, to know that, you know, what's going on present day will speak to the, like, as you did a great job saying you and speaking to the board and knowing we're the board of directors in SpaceX, but kind of addressing that elephant in the room, that there is still that one individual who has the ultimate seat at the table of what's going to be that compelling.
Well, and that's why I hinted at the end of the day, putting things into space is an international issue.
Yeah.
And maybe leverage more about, you know, like you said, SpaceX could be a leader, but I would have expected you to say part of that leadership is generating a much stronger collaboration of countries around the world. It's like, hey, I think it's great you're creating launch vehicles and you're learning how to do space like we did before, but we've already got conditions out there that could kill this. So there needs to be besides what SpaceX does, you've got to have an international collaborative. The UN body that regulates this, the international agencies that regulate this need to come to the table and emphasize the international response. And that's it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I felt like I was back at work all over again.
Appreciate it.
I have to say it's really awesome to have someone who's had industry experience for so long for our case. So
And
that's really cool to hear from you.
it showed as well. Your questions were very thought provoking. Not that you both did an excellent job, but I could definitely tell.
I do have one question for tomorrow. Do we get the same judges for the 10-minute and 90-second? No, okay. That's what I was wondering.
You may or may not. Sometimes it's sometimes it's
no guarantee.
There's no guarantee that there's the same. They rotate.
My gut feel, and you can correct me, Jason, my gut feel is that who you get for these briefs is a more experienced set of judges. Some of the judges involved at this stage may not have as many years behind them. But I got to believe in those brief ones, you're going to get people that have done this long enough to give you that quick reaction.
Got it. Thank you so much.
But again, they're never there to try to catch you or prove you wrong or have any gotcha moments of things that you don't know. It's really just to have you feel that you are presenting to executive boards and building that experience of, oh, these are the questions that would be under their consideration, so that they know if it is that, oh my God, it's the 90-second, like I'm the CEO of a firm, you barely got me in the elevator and you're gonna pitch me that idea, and okay, I know what I need to know. I know the most important facts here.
And very clever green screen behind you.
There just in case. Good thing we had it.
All right.
Okay. Well, good luck with your presentations tomorrow. That's all. We enjoy it. As I said, we learned from everyone here today. So